We were talking about, we were talking a little bit about the Evangelical Immigration Table, a Soros-funded outfit, by the way, so as Sojourners, very Soros-funded. I did make a comment that Wallis has spoken out that, America is responsible for ISIS, and Wallis had earlier written an op-ed for the Huffington Post. This is posted on the IRD website, Institute for Religion and Democracy. Wallis had earlier written an op-ed for the Huffington Post entitled "War is Not the Answer, Opposing the Use of Military Force to Defeat the Jihadist Group," but Wallis took the anti-war and anti-oil themes of that piece to the extreme in his interview, arguing that the blame for ISIS lay with America and that prominent conservatives wanted to invade and occupy every country in the world. Wallis told host Bill Press that before discussing how to deal with ISIS, the important question was why ISIS was drawing so many recruits to begin with. He said that the Middle East was full of uneducated young people who were, quote, responding to the real grievances. What are the real grievances? The oil economy. And then he goes on to say, if we've shifted borders to create this oil machine to satisfy our addictions, until we deal with the oil economy and the injustice of it and our need to completely change our way of fueling our way of life, we're going to have one ISIS after another. When we were talking during the break, gentlemen, obviously what's fueled ISIS is the Koran. Excuse me, it's not American actions such as outlined by Mr. Wallis.
I mean, this is so far off base. And as I stated, I might as well say it on the air, I stated they would blame a Martian landing on the conservatives if they could, because that's just the way they see the world. We are the epitome of evil if they're going to give ISIS a break on this. This is all about what the Quran says. They're hardcore, trying to bring Sharia law to pass everywhere they can. They've said so. Has nothing to do with America per se. We just aren't what they want us or envision us to be.
There's only two problems with Jim Wallis.
Yeah.
He doesn't know the Bible and he doesn't know history. Oil was not even used by man until the 9th century.
That's right.
Islamic terror goes back to the life of Muhammad. He killed Jews, he killed Christians, and he killed Arabs. Eric, and you said it correctly, ISIS is an effect of the Quran. It is not an effect of the U.S. oil policy.
I know, but this guy speaks at college campuses, including my alma mater, Bethel University in St. Paul, Minnesota. He speaks at conservative evangelical institutions, even churches, all the time. And young people particularly buy hook, line, and sinker what he has to say. Nobody's thinking here, starting with Jim Wallis, but neither are those that are hearing his words.
When we say that he speaks at conservative evangelical, well, that's what used to be conservative and evangelical. The problem is today, evangelical doesn't mean what it once did, that's for sure. If Jim Wallis is an evangelical, my gracious.
Oh, I know. We know he isn't.
Yeah, I know. I just want to point out that that's the problem, is that the places we once thought we could trust, we can't trust anymore when it comes to seminaries, denominations, etc. That's why testing everything that comes along by what the scripture says, which is changeless, is so important to everybody.
And Mary Danielson, and you addressed this in the booklet, and we've addressed it in the early part of this interview here, and that is the inequality issue. And again, he's come out here in the last week, and he says the current Ebola outbreak is much more than a public health crisis. It is an inequality crisis. People dying of Ebola in West Africa did not choose to be born in West Africa any more than I choose to be born in the United States, or my wife to be born in England. The knowledge and infrastructure to treat the sick and contain the virus exists in high and middle income countries. However, over many years, we have failed to make these things accessible to low-income people in Liberia, Sierra Leone, etc. So again, Mary, it goes back to the racial/inequality issue, which of course again is nuts.
Yes, what fascinates me most, I'm listening to you guys and really enjoying the back and forth here, but I mean, obviously guilt and shaming and blaming is the number one religion of Jim Wallis, because they alone are the ones who say what an authentic Christian is based on their own rules. And the whole thing about shaming and blaming us for the lifestyles that we live in developed countries, we have all these products based on oil, and we have a technology economy, and we have all this great advancement and all these wonderful things, and we have softer facial tissue and bottled water and all those other things. And then as soon as our culture lives like this and absorbs all these things, now comes the shaming and the blaming, then it's all your fault and that sort of thing, which is very, very difficult to listen to. The self-righteousness is almost intolerable as much as the ideology is. But as far as environmental environmentalism. 2 weeks ago, 126 nations gathered at the UN to discuss this very thing. It was the UN Climate Summit, and it used to be that the U.S. and Europe were blamed exclusively for the damage from carbon emissions, since the industrial age began about 150 years ago. Well, now emerging markets like China, who were formerly victims of the evil wealthy nations and their environmental ruin, they're being called on to foot half the bill for their capitalist progress. And so now you add to that all the weather-related and quake-related damage and the typhoons that is, again, blamed on our ruination of the environment. Mm-hmm. Well, all these things happen in poorer countries, and there are ongoing costs of fixing this environmental mess, and it has now become a matter of rich versus poor, because the poorer nations are paying for our evil anyway, but they can't afford to repair this infrastructure after these climate disasters. So it's one snowball effect after another. So now we redistribute the wealth of the industrialized nations to do penitence for all the ways that we ruin the world with, like I said, softer facial tissue and bottled water. And the result is going to be legally binding agreements that tax us virtually into third world status, and now we're going to have to bail out all the other nations that we are ruining. I mean, is this insane or what? I mean,